and gentlemen, welcome to the American Masterminds podcast. I'm your host, Topher Sheeler. I'm joined tonight by the one and only Mr. Jared Bayless. And, of course, you know, the big fella, Mr. Rob Adams.
What up, what up?
Very rare that we got all three of us on here. This is kind of fun.
It's a banner day. Yes,
it's a banner day. But, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a very exciting evening planned for you here tonight. We have the one and only Mr. Jerry Hancock and his beautiful wife, Naomi. They are the founders of Sub-Zero Ice Cream. They've got one heck of a story. I cannot wait to get into it. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Aiden at Enavive. Are you tired of worrying about what's in your water? Enavive has the solution. From our whole house water purification systems to our fast-filling reverse osmosis units, we can give your family clean, safe water at every tap. Text us now to schedule your consultation and experience water the way it should be, pure.
So we met at Tribe House.
Yeah.
Tribe House is an organization here locally. It's kind of like a super BNI, and I've done a lot of networking organizations. Name it. I've probably signed up and done it for a year or two. I'm really excited about Tribe House because of the way their model is. They're a little bit atypical. They have you get to know one another in a way that's different than I've ever been in. For example, when you sit down, they say, tell a story for 1 minute that's stranger than fiction about yourself, a true story.
Right.
And so it kind of forces you to be like, oh, well, what can I talk about? And so it's a lot of fun, and it really reveals a lot of character about the people in your circle. And there's usually 5 or 6 people in a little circle, and around they go, and they're very strict about the timing. And so it's kind of like a fun, like a parlor game, if you think about back in the good old days when that's what we used to do. And we sat down, and I remember when you were talking, Jerry, like you said a couple things. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'm like, oh, I got to get to know this guy. He's interesting, because there's sometimes people tell their stories and you're like, okay, whatever. But
you had way too much time to sit and think about this.
Yeah,
That's a lot of fabrication going on there.
And then also towards the end, you talk about the problem that you solve in the community and the value that you bring. And you talked about your business, which is Sub-Zero Ice Cream. And you talked about it, and I thought, this guy's kind of passionate about this. Like, this is something he's put a lot of thought into. And so that's why I've invited you on the podcast. I want to talk about the idea, where it came from, and kind of your journey to where you are now, because now you have several franchises, and you have a whole new set of problems that you're dealing with that aren't the startup problems anymore. They're kind of the how do I maintain and grow problems.
There's a transition, where you go from it's very small and nothing to how do you get to where you're trying to support. But we have stores, and so like we get called in to cover a shift.
Oh, you
and
do?
It's like, oh yeah. It's like, I mean, we're, it's like, hey, somebody called in sick. We don't have anybody to cover it. It's like one of us has got to go, or both of us got to go. And sometimes we go to one store, and the other person goes to the other store. So luckily, we only have 2 stores, so it's in a way. But yeah, it's like it's when you're so you work all day, and then you get called in at night. And when I was in the Guard, I would work till 1 o'clock in the morning, and then have to get up at 5 o'clock to go to the Guard and do that, Friday and Saturday, and get up Sunday and do it again.
It's glorious owning a business.
Yeah,
everyone should do it.
You wear all the hats, you do all the things.
But
in some ways, it validates it too, because it's kind of nice to be talking to franchisees and be saying, the other night I was there, talking to customers, or I've noticed customers say this. And if you're not working the line, you're not talking to customers. So it shows that you're in the fray just as they are, and being able to see some of the things and get some ideas for things.
Right.
Well, we had a guy that came in today, and he was trying to sell me a service, but he says, I used to come in here when I was single about 10 years ago. He says, I would come into your store, and I would sit in the corner, read a book, and buy 2 ice creams, go through 2 ice cream. And he says that I would talk to people in the store, and I would talk them into certain types of ice cream. Mm-hmm. And I was like, anyway, it was just kind of, he says, it was my therapy to go out instead of a bar. I went to your store. And I was like, I remember you. I remember seeing you in the corner reading a book. And I was like, okay, that's great. I mean, he's relaxed, and I don't think I remember talking to him back then, but anyway, it was kind of cool.
That was cool. So you've had you've been doing the business now for how long? How many years?
Go ahead.
20 years since we started our first counter, since we first came up with it and started putting it together.
20 years. That's
20
long enough to
years.
know better.
Yeah, I'm telling
We're
you.
just too dumb to quit.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say something like
I say that joke because a lot of time when you start a business, like it's a great idea. How hard could it be? And then here we are chipping away still at some of the same problems, but I would imagine all new problems. So let's start back 20 years ago. What was it that made you think, oh man, you know what we need to do? Open an ice cream store.
Oh, I never thought I was going to open up an ice cream shop. I had pizza maybe, ice cream no. I'm not a sweet tooth. She is. And so we had a burrito shop. And so I was getting laid off left and right from.
He was in the software industry, and it's pretty typical, common in the software industry that you can always find a job, but you don't. But it's
Can't
job
keep one.
security. Yeah, I mean, just
especially
because you're
right after
startup.
9/11. Like right after 9/11, it was just tough, to keep it, nobody was hiring. And there's two things that happened during 9/11, right about that time. One is 9/11. The other was Y2K. People think, well, Y2K, that was the internet bubble. It wasn't the internet bubble. There was no internet bubble. It was everybody synchronized their buying to Y2K. So if you buy a car, you usually replace it every 5 years or something like that. If you buy a computer, every 3 years. Everybody's synchronized now so nobody's buying in 2000 and 2001. And when it comes to software. And it was pre-SaaS, so there wasn't the subscription model, so that didn't exist. So then if you weren't a senior level person, you got laid off, and it was the only people that were hiring were startups, and 9/11 hit, and startups, their funding just evaporated, and I was like, well, this sucks. I mean, I was out of between 2000 and 2003, 2004, I was out of work half the time. And I was like, well, let's buy a franchise. So I thought, we can run it. I'll go back to work. It wasn't quite that easy. But anyway, I went to her the first 4 months after we opened. It was called New York Burrito. I said, how we doing? She looked at the books. She said, we're only losing $4,000 a month. And I'm like, oh, crap. We have no breathing room whatsoever. And I was like, luckily, I found a job. And it lasted a year. But it was 1 mile away. So I was going back and forth. I'd go to it was doing testing, software testing for HP printers, the big ones. But HP had contracted out to a company here. So HP never knew when I was working or not. They just knew whether my work was getting done. So I'd go in, work, I'd go open the store, work the lunch shift, go back and forth, until 11, 12 o'clock at night. So, and do that for a full year. And it was supposed to be a 3-month contract, lasted a year. So it was fortunate.
So it funded your business that was slowly bleeding.
Yeah.
Which is, you want a business, but there's always that time. Is this ego? What are we doing here? Like, we're spending money. We're not making money. And our quality of life is deteriorated because you're driving back and forth between work now. You've got 2 jobs essentially.
Mm.
And so the burrito business didn't take.
Well, it was good food, but there was a lot of, Caparia was taken off at the time, and we were told, like, pick a location on State Street by the franchisee or franchisor. And then anyway, picked a location on State Street. We didn't check to see whether there was going to be construction. So that between 8th North expansion and State Street drainage or the sewer line expansion, it was 4 years that we had construction right in front of our business.
Perfect.
4 years. I mean, that's a long time. And so, nobody's coming into your parking lot if they're
Have to
They
drive
gotta-
around.
Yeah.
We also figured, well, a lot of cars pass it. It's a really busy street. The problem is they're passing it, and they've just left the stoplight, and so they're picking up speed by the time they see us. And we talk to people like out in the community, even to mention our store. They're like, "Oh yeah, I've seen that. Isn't it about like 12th North or 16th North?" And we were on 8th. So it's like people's minds didn't register that they had seen it by the time they were already more than 4 or 8 blocks past.
And we
So
learned
it
a
just
lot
was a
about
really difficult
cognitive,
location.
like what people think as they're moving. If they're doing certain activities, they think of certain things. Like if they're driving, they're in automatic mode and they're not paying attention to they're driving past.
As a
And-
motorcycle rider, I'll vouch for that one.
Yeah.
It's true.
I see
I had a job where I had to really not start knowing addresses, and my boss would be like, it's over there by and he would name a business, and I'd like, I've seen that place, but
Yeah.
it seems like it's south of 90th South. Like I knew kind of where it was.
Right.
And it kind of made me start to be more spatial, like realizing like, oh, I'm going to start paying attention to where things are.
Right.
Because most people don't,
Yeah.
especially now with phones.
Yeah.
Like I use my phone to get me home sometimes in place. Like I just want to know the best way to get home. And so we're not thinking at all anymore.
Well, and I always thought a little bit differently because I joined the Air Force right after out of college or out of high school, and I noticed that I do things differently than a lot of people. Like if you've been in the military, you're always looking for the exit when you walk in a building. You're always looking for where it's just I don't know. It's weird, but that's what you. I don't know that they teach that, but it's just the way it is. Maybe it's just the drills that they do. But I'm always looking for, the surroundings.
In case there's an emergency,
Yeah, I
follow
guess.
Jerry. He knows where to go.
I feel like that's just a natural thing for people that can think beyond the end of their nose. Like if you're aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
you kind of naturally like. I don't like having my back to the door in a restaurant. Like there are carryover. I know that's all military trained and whatnot.
Yeah.
But if you're paying attention, that is stuff that you should be doing.
Right.
So now we've got the burrito place. It's in a great location. You've got nothing but
Yeah.
smooth sailing. How did the ice cream thing come about? Because that's a big jump.
So we already, the space we rented, we knew was too big, and we actually built a wall between them. There were 2 separate entrances. We built a wall. We expected to sublease that spot. And we had a year before our rent went up significantly enough that we would really need to have the sublease. And it didn't happen. And we got closer and closer. We're moving along, somewhat making it with the burrito shop, but still needing something else. And so as we got closer and closer, started asking the customers, well, if we add something, what should we add? What do you think? And a lot of people said, well, ice cream. I think ice cream would go really well with this. I've always thought ice cream goes well with Mexican food. And it wasn't quite Mexican food. It was more like an American style wrap place. But so we started looking into different ways of doing ice cream. And Jerry tells the story actually really well.
Well, I everybody has a different background. And this is one thing I really think that I tell people like you, we probably get into this later, but I look at everybody and everybody has a different story. Whether it's my brother or me, even though we grew up in the same family, we still had different experiences. So those different experiences make you unique. I did sales when I was growing up, and then go through college. I was in the Air Force Reserve, worked on F-16s. I have a degree in chemistry. I also got a patent when I was in college on an eyeglass retainer, and I went and I also did a year of industrial design, and then I worked in software engineering. So it's there's a lot of different things. Now, all of those things gave me a unique perspective. So, but the product development said, well, how do I figure out what I'm going to bring in? And it was ask the customer. So that was like, what do you think we ought to bring in? Ice cream. Okay. So I go to the ice cream manufacturer. What do will you help us make an ice cream shop? Yeah, we don't recommend it. So they said, if you're already struggling, people will just go right past you, so it's not going to help you. It'd just be an expense. So like, all right, they give one caveat, unless it's different. Now it's back to it's the product development. Come back to the customer. What do you like about other people's product? How do you make it better? So I wasn't trying to find you got to find a problem and solve it. And people don't even think that they've got a problem. Nobody thinks they've got a ice cream problem until they do. For instance, like if somebody's lactose intolerant, or they want a different flavor, or they want a different texture, or all of those are people, they until they order it, then they don't know that they have that problem. So finding a problem, how to make it better.
So what problem did you discover in the ice cream world?
Well, what I found is that what people liked about other people's product is customization. They liked adding something, whether it's a mix in, but they can't change the flavor. Whatever flavors is, it is what it is. And it's, you may get as much as 16 flavors to choose from, but that's about it. So it's, so my thought was, how do you make it better? And the only thing I could come up with is change the flavor. Well, the only way to change the flavor of an ice cream is to use a liquid. And the only way, because you can't dissolve a flavor into a solid. So how do you change the flavor? Or how do you then make ice cream fast enough where you can change the flavor after they order it? And then, so that came back to the chemistry thinking, of how do you, okay, now we're starting with states of matter. And this is what we've adapted that into going into schools and doing STEM education and talking about, okay, can you change the flavor of ice cream, when it's frozen? No. So how do you change the flavor? You have to start with the liquid. So it's giving a different perspective. And that's, so we were like, okay, how are you going to freeze it? So we went into, I started researching like, small pots, that would freeze, and, little KitchenAid machines, and it'd be about 2 to 5 minutes per batch, to just get it soft serve. And I was like, that's just too slow. You just couldn't buy enough machines to go
Stay
fast
efficient,
enough.
yeah.
And so then she saw an article in Popular Science and put it out for me, and it was on liquid nitrogen. And I was like, well, that's it. And I won't tell you what room in the house it was in. But anyway, but the point of the matter is, all great things, ideas. Anyway, I'm just kidding. But it's but I called out from the room, and I said, guess what we're gonna do? And she's like, what? And I'm like, this is what we're gonna do. And it was a lot of testing after that. It was like there was a lot to figure out.
So you take a liquid, I can choose any flavor, I can make it any flavor that I want, and then you freeze it with the liquid nitrogen in the store, like right in front of my eyes. Mm-hmm. And I've got to come into this place. I've got to check it out. It sounds amazing.
Sure.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't it it's like a opposite of a griddle, right? Don't you do it on?
You're thinking of rolled ice cream, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
cold plate. Or where they roll it, where they put it on the cold plate. Yeah.
Well, why don't you educate us? How does that liquid
how does it
nitrogen actually work?
So, so we take a bowl, pour that liquid ice cream mix in, add the flavors to it, and then we spray it with liquid nitrogen. And the thing about liquid nitrogen is, it only stays a liquid if it's 321 degrees below zero. So it has to stay that cold. Once it's not that cold, it starts to evaporate. But as it's also evaporating, the cream and the heat in the cream, even though it's refrigerated cream, it still has some heat, goes into the liquid nitrogen, causes the liquid nitrogen to evaporate, causing also the liquid cream to become a solid, to become frozen. So we're adding the liquid nitrogen, then stirring it around. As it stirs, liquid nitrogen is evaporating, heat's leaving the liquid cream mix, making it a solid. You have then creamy, dense, because it's made by a hand instead of frozen and instead of whipped while it's frozen. So most ice cream is 50% air. That's one thing that I love about our ice cream, is it's how different it is in consistency. It's so more dense. And then we add mix-ins to it and scoop it together. And
you add what to it?
Mix-ins or candies or fruits or nuts or whatever.
You want.
Different things in it. So But
But
yeah,
you can do
and
it.
you get to see it right there, especially because once you start to freeze it, all of a sudden you get all this fog, because the fog is the water in the air that's getting cold and condensing into a fog. And so that's kind of the best thing about it. And we've actually patterned our stores to enhance that, or to focus on it, so that the fog rolls over the counter, and we have lights on the counter so that you see the fog even more. And it's just fun to see kids up there, playing in it or trying to catch it in their mouth and blow it out.
Wow.
The fog is white, and so what we have, the counters black, and so then it got a contrast, and then we have lights that light it up.
Wow.
And so it's got this effect.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
it. And
It's
then-
a show.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I joke around that I didn't think we could make. I didn't know if I could make really good ice cream. I knew I could make a really good show, and it was.
So it's kind of like the quality was a bonus.
Yeah. And so so when I started playing around with it, we found some literature, and there's some academic articles of how to do it, but it didn't really work. I called a guy that I knew that was in the chemistry department with me when I was going to school. And I said, "Have you ever seen this being done?" They said, "Yeah, we do it for chemistry days." And I said, "Can you sell it?" He says, "No, it's not very good. It's not consistent." And I said, "Well, I think I can figure it out." And so I went to work, and the guy that wrote about it in the article, his name's Theodore Gray, and he talked about its process, and it was very different than what actually happens. And so I talked to him years later. I actually interviewed him, and I said, "Why did you use the words you did?" And he says, "Well, I was trying to be funny. I was trying to be use cooking terms that." And he says, "I was just trying to show I knew some cooking terms." And I said, "Well, it doesn't work that way." "Yeah, I know." And so what we figured out is if you have 6 ounces in a bowl, then it's about that thick, like Lay's, but it's about that wide, okay, in the bowl. So about that thick, and then if you put just that same amount of nitrogen on top, it completely covers the surface. Then it doesn't mix. The nitrogen doesn't mix with the cream.
The cream is more dense, and so it just sits on top.
So it sits on top. Well, when it does that, it forms a barrier, a frozen barrier in between. So you have 3 phases now. You have 2 phases that now go to 3 phases. The third phase is solid in the center, and then when we take the blade, from this spade and go around, it just peels up. It's like a meat slicer, but it's like phases.
So you have liquid underneath that. Then it's created a barrier.
Mm-hmm. And then it just every time you go around, this just gets smaller and smaller to it's like an integral, if you will.
That's kind of how we've had to that is how we had to explain it in the patent. How those different diagrams, those different phases and stuff. And then as we're teaching employees and people about it that helps, because it's heat transfer. So even then, when you have the liquid underneath and the frozen up above, you still want to transfer the heat from the liquid to the more solid frozen part, so that it becomes an equilibrium.
So you're peeling. So then, do you peel it off as you're going? You're peeling it off, and it's refreezing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You're not really mixing it. You're more peeling.
Right. I mean, it's raising up. The patent claim says plow, and so as it plows, and the solid raises up, and the liquid goes to
the
the
liquid nitrogen down to the other as well.
Wow.
So.
So you have these. I've got a lot of questions. Let's go. Let's do these questions.
Get going.
So you do. Is there any special handling permits for having liquid nitrogen on premises? And do you have to have the
It's a very
certifications
common
for the?
question.
That was my very first one.
Yes.
Good
Yeah.
job.
That's a really
So how
common
many
question.
workplace
Yes.
injuries have we had?
Yeah. Do you have to have a placard on the door?
None?
So
Go ahead.
sorry. The main, because that is a really common question, and I think it's interesting because there aren't really government certifications or regulations on it, but companies who make liquid nitrogen are very careful about who they sell liquid nitrogen to, because they don't want to be liable, and they know there are dangers to liquid nitrogen, but there are safe ways to use it. So they will only sell it to people who know what those safe procedures are. So we've had to work with liquid nitrogen companies and show them our process and explain and have them even come and visit to be able to show how we do it. And that's really the regulation part, which I think is really interesting. It's really more, it's not government regulation, it's companies protecting themselves, which completely makes sense.
I did freight for a while, and I worked with a company that transported nitrogen, and it was a huge deal. It was a big process.
Now, the volume you're dealing with is a key too, because when you're dealing with large volume, it has different risks, and also the pressure.
Yeah.
The volume, the pressure, and
so we're working with it at a much lower pressure.
We're using low pressure and low volume.
Yeah.
And
okay. All right.
So,
next question. I'm excited. So you have this liquid nitrogen, and it's stored. It has to be stored at a temperature. So you have to have special equipment to store your nitrogen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then the application of it, like, or when you're pouring it out, because it's evaporating at such a high rate, like, how are you applying it to the surface of the cream?
Well, we have a nozzle that comes directly off of the tank, and the tank's about 1,500 liter tank, typically 400 gallons. And so then that's vacuum jacketed all the way, so it's very super insulated. And then at the end, if I didn't have a nozzle, so we've designed a nozzle. There's a thing called phase separator, and this is one thing that when it comes to safety, you have to think about things. You have to look at the way the government regulation or OSHA regulates things is they really give you the opportunity to make judgment calls. And this is where there is a regulation, but the regulation says, if this, then that. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, they say, go off the MSDS sheet or the material safety data sheet or or what do they call it nowadays? Right. But it's and so that says, put a face shield on, gloves up to your elbows, long sleeve shirts, pants, steel-toed shoes, apron. Okay. Well, that's because typically when somebody's using nitrogen in, say, the large volume, or even with a phase separator where they're filling an open top container, they're using a phase separator that doesn't have any directional flow. It goes in 360 degrees. So it's going to hit you everywhere. Okay. So there's no way around it. Now, what we said is, and then the government says, all right, but if you have engineered, something, then it's okay. So in other words, you can either cover yourself with a chemical hazmat suit, or I can cover the.
You can direct the liquid nitrogen, so it's not spraying everywhere.
What we did is I started out with a syrup cup, and I drilled it out and put it around the phase separator, so it can only go in one direction. And then I went to a copper pipe, and then I ended up with actually a stainless steel cup is what we use now. And so we make those and we put them around the valve, so it can't go in your eyes. It can't go across the counter. It can't go, it can only go into the bowl.
And what's interesting about that is that over the years, as we've developed it, that didn't come at the very beginning. So little by little, we've developed the process to where the employees, the only interaction they have with the liquid nitrogen is it completely being directionally poured into the bowl, where they're not actually working, changing out tanks or doing other things. And all of that is, like, we've specifically worked on that process and procedure so that it is completely safe. But it's been something that's taken us years to do, so that we can come back and say we have. We use an electronic valve too.
We've always used an electronic valve right from nearly the beginning, so that it's actuated by a foot pedal or a timer, and so your hands don't have to be
near it.
How long after, when it's in the bowl, how long does it take to? Obviously, they're not actually touching it. I would imagine it settles in the bottom of where they're mixing it. Mm-hmm. So where's the danger zone? How after it's poured in there, if you reached your hand in there?
My opinion is there really isn't a danger zone, because there's also another thing, and that's called the Leidenfrost effect. And this is another thing we teach in schools, is that as the Leidenfrost effect says, it says that if there's a large enough temperature between a solid and a liquid meaning being the colder part, that the liquid will vaporize and will propel itself. Well, unlike everybody thinks that working in a restaurant is safe, but I can guarantee you that it's a lot more dangerous than you think. Not just with cuts, but fryers and ovens, right? If I splash grease on me, it's gonna burn. I mean, our son worked at Wendy's. He came home and had a blister all the way around his hand because he stuck his hand in to go grab the
basket.
And I'm like, well, you need to report that, And he said, oh, I don't know, it's my fault. I'm like, but it's an incident, you need to report that. But with nitrogen, if it touches my hand, if I put it under the direct stream, it'll just roll right off. It doesn't stick. It propels itself away.
Oh.
And so it's
As long as it's just a spray.
now
or
we
a
also
splash.
use a spade. So the spade is 8 inches. So you're never putting your hand below the level of the bowl. You've got a bowl that's 6 or 8 inches, tall, and the spade's 8 inches. You can't.
You're not even anywhere close to it.
Yeah, not even close.
Yeah.
So how much can you make at a time? What's an order? Is it like you said?
So our largest order is 10 ounces is the pint.
Okay.
But we actually do catering events where we will make a whole half gallon of ice cream in the same bowl size that we do it. And we're doing it a little differently in that way, but we're still using the very same process where we're using liquid nitrogen and ice cream mix and making about half a gallon of ice cream at a time.
We can make a half a gallon in 30 seconds.
Half a gallon in 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
So you're way more efficient than everybody else.
Yeah. We can serve. We had a 10 by 10 booth out at a company event last summer, and it was 30, 40 mile an hour winds too. So it was really terrible outdoors at the park at Thanksgiving Point.
So
And
winds can get pretty
we
bad
did
there.
36 gallons out of a 10 by 10 booth in 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours.
Holy cow.
And we scooped and served and made fresh 36 gallons of ice cream mix.
You have any idea what that would take on just like a slow churn, something like that? I imagine ice cream making is kind of a slow process.
Yeah, if I were going to make it if I was in a company or a store where they make it in-house, they're going to make a maximum of 10 gallons at a time, one flavor. Now it goes into bins, but it's going to be soft. Now it's got to go in a hardening cabinet for about 18 more hours. And then it's got to be pulled out to a serving cabinet to be warmed up to a serving temperature. So so you're talking a minimum 18-hour really cycle of getting, and you're constantly, so you're about 20, 30 minutes for a batch at the quickest on a machine making a batch. So it's a lot. I would not want to run
Regular ice cream.
Yeah.
So what does a catered event look like? Do you guys have a trailer? What kind of flavors do you offer during a catered event? What does that typically look like?
Go ahead.
So we'll have 2 6-foot tables and a 50-liter tank that's about the size of the table. And we offer, depending on the event, if it's a vending event or a catered event. So for example, if we're catering a wedding, we'll have 4 different combinations of flavors and mixes. So 4 different options.
Okay.
And then we'll make those throughout the night and serve and scoop those. But
But
we're
it's
making
completely
it right there. so you
customized
see it.
up to what the party wants.
Okay.
So a lot
so
of times
it's-
we'll
So it can be any flavor you could possibly imagine. You want honey lavender, you want whatever.
caramel, dulce de leche,
yeah.
cinnamon. Yeah.
What?
All the
Wow.
different ones.
So sorry.
Say that one more time.
What is it? What was
That's,
that?
well, we actually call it our Bernoulli Brulee. That's the name in the store, but it's my favorite. But it's caramel and dulce de leche and cinnamon with Heath and Twix. And
Oh my gosh.
that's the favorites.
Well,
I
that
always
does
suggest
sound
that we'll
really
have
good.
brides
That's the
come
end
in and we'll have
The
them taste
cinnamon
things
just
and-
really kicks it
Yeah.
off.
That's
It
the end of the
just-
podcast. We got to go. That sounds amazing. So go ahead, Toph.
Okay. My question is so is it economically, from a business standpoint, is your production cost a lot less than other
I
other
think so.
ice cream manufacturers?
I've never worked in another ice cream shop, so I have a hard time definitively saying that, but I believe so. Where our electrical cost is less, our mechanical cost is less, our repair costs are less, our,
A lot of times people think that our labor must be so much higher, and it might be, but it was interesting when we've looked at other, like even when we looked at Menchie's, was it?
I
Anyways,
think
I
some
shouldn't-
of
maybe I shouldn't say
the
the
franchise disclosure
but some
documents
of
tell
them-
you what like labor is and
we were
across their
surprised to see
system.
how high their labor
Yeah.
cost
Everybody
percentage
thinks like
is about the
yogurt
same
is
as what
really low
as what
labor,
we get,
but
and
it's
it's
really
a
not.
self-serve yogurt shop. Like you'd think that would especially bring the labor cost down.
Somebody's got to be
So,
refilling those.
I
They've
think
got to be
it's-
washing because there's always spills.
Do you
They've
guys,
gotta be-
do you guys have storage? Do you store flavors? Like you have pre-made pints ready to go, or is it all made to order? Because that kind of seems like you're selling a show. You don't really have.
We don't have any ice cream pre-frozen other than like cakes and ice cream cakes, ice cream pies, things that are to-go items that people can take, but we don't have anything other than that. So it's sometimes people come in and like, can we do a sample? We're like, well, we don't have anything that's frozen yet. So we store flavors, but our flavors are so concentrated that we don't have to have very much space for that.
Wow.
So our flavors are the other thing that's interesting, and this comes with the chemistry that's really interesting to me. And anyways, is that if you think about a normal coffee syrup like you'd buy with the 25-ounce bottles, they're 2.5 ounce pumps, so quite a bit of syrup that goes out of each pump. Well, those are designed for hot flavors, so those are designed to go in a coffee, and which if I'm going to make if I'm going to use ice cream mix, for instance, for a hot chocolate, if I use that same mix, I'm going to use 4 ounces to make 16 ounces of hot chocolate. And the reason for that is because the colder the temperature, the less vibration over your tongue. Yeah. And so therefore the hotter it is, the more the molecules vibrate, so the more flavor comes across. And so you need 4 times more flavor at the cold temperature
To
than
deliver
you
the
do at
same effect.
Yeah.
That makes
as
sense.
you do at the hot. And so you're so it's so we've designed all of our flavors specifically. What we use 1/10 ounce, so it's quite a bit more concentrated than a 1/4 ounce at the hotter flavor. If you really think about that difference in flavor profile.
Let's talk about flavor for a second. It seems to me that you have to be kind of, because I could think of a few flavors. I'm a little bit of a food guy, but you guys are spending a lot of time with like what we just described with the cinnamon. Mm-hmm. Are you always like on the search for the latest the flavor? I imagine the part in Willy Wonka where he's going around the world.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. He's like tasting like bugs and stuff.
Yeah.
Tasting Mary right now.
And so, is that something that's a real thing?
It is. Well, especially because we'll do sensations of the season and try to have, because we can do so many unique things, because we start with just liquid and we can add whatever. So there are so many different flavors that we can do. So we've wanted to especially show that as we do like seasonal flavors. We have one of our staff actually is, she's a food scientist by degree, but she also is just really, she's great at watching trends and what's out there. So that's the lavender honey that he mentioned, is one that she came, because she just, and as we get and plan out the year and look at things, she's like, well, what's the one, the margarita. Oh, anyways, she'll come up with these different things that you're like, let's try this out. And so we have a strawberry rhubarb now that's a seasonal one. That's not one that we usually have. But she's like, that's a spring flavor. Let's try that out. So
strawberry balsamic vinegar, and we did with pepper. And so and like
Or a
over
mango lime
Christmas,
tahini. We did that in
yeah,
the
that
summer.
was really good.
Wow.
And then we
Cranberry
had
jalapeno.
cranberry jalapeno was over Christmas. So that was, and I love that. And you talk about Willy Wonka, there was a catering event we did early on. It was fairly early on. And it was up at the University of Utah, and they wanted, it was like a scholastic publishing convention. And they wanted some unique flavors. And so Naomi was coming up with these different ones. So we did apple pie Tabasco, and we did maple bacon, and
Oh my God.
And
they-
kind of what's in, well, go ahead.
go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
What's interesting about that apple Tabasco, that actually came from a customer in our very first store. And he said, BYU Creamery used to have an apple Tabasco flavor, which I never would have thought of. He said, they don't have it anymore, but I remember I used to love it. And I
Of
was
course,
like,
they don't have it anymore.
well, he says, we could try that, And what's funny is that we had the New York burrito because we tore down the wall between them and had our ice cream on one side and the burrito. So of course we had hot sauces there. So I was like, oh, let's try it. So we pulled over the hot sauce and did it with the ice cream and added some of our apple flavor, and it was so good. And it was such a great combo. Like, we actually found when you do apple pie filling for it, and then you put in the Tabasco or the hot sauce, it actually doesn't come through as a hot sauce. It comes through as like a red hot cinnamon, and it's an aftertaste. So you taste the sweet first, and then you get the spicy in the end.
What?
But
Yeah,
but your brain kind of translates it as being not a hot sauce, but a cinnamon because
of the
it's
sweet.
with the
Wow.
And so then
So-
you're also, but it doesn't. You're like, oh, it's not spicy, and then all of a sudden it hits
Then
you
it's
after
spicy.
it.
But
So
it's
it's like
just
a
enough.
delayed effect because of that temperature, because of those vibration of them.
You guys hiring? Yes. I'm
Terrible
ready.
idea. You really,
Well, and actually, one of the things we do, one of the perks of being an employee, we have them have they get an ice cream every shift, and we do that on purpose because we want them to try different ice creams so that they have something to be able to tell customers when they ask
Yeah.
what their favorite is.
Ooh,
or
I just
so
tried
they
this. You
can
should
say.
give it a shot. Like that would be
Yeah.
would be a
Yeah.
great sales pitch.
Like I like mint lime and those types of things, and but I'm always also a coconut berry, and she's more of a caramel. I
Chocolate.
like those things, but like when I talk to people about like what flavors, I tell my employees, I said, you're like a therapist, and what I mean by that is like, well, people say, what should I get? And I go, well, tell me which quadrant you
Are you a fruity
Yeah.
person, or are you
Are
a
you in the mood for fruity, for
savory?
chocolates,
You want
or-
some
yes.
chocolatey? Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
So-
And then
I would be so good at that. That would be like fun. So let's talk.
Yes.
No, I want
Ice
the
cream
chocolate.
therapy.
No.
Could
No,
you-
you don't.
could you seriously imagine,
Yeah.
like, if you had? So what I'm hearing is you can do syrups, spices,
Oh, yeah.
whatever you want to mix in here, right?
Mm.
How would you avoid not having a Professor Snape wall of
Yeah.
literally everything that you could possibly think
Yeah.
of? I'd hold competitions of a
Ideas.
sommelier. What's like you got to come up with an ice cream craftsman of
Yeah.
sorts and like DJ style. What's up, dude?
That's a great idea. You could have a contest. Oh man, so
Well,
much
they-
fun.
Well, what they call the people like a bartender, but like the
like a
mixologist.
sommelier.
yeah, where they're
Yeah.
mixing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That'd be so much fun. We're not allowed to
Well,
work there.
originally I was planning on having. Originally, I'd wanted to put the pour stems on bottles, and then I was like, well, let's just go all the way and do flair bartending.
Oh.
But then training kids to do flair bartending, I figured was just a little bit too dangerous.
yeah, that someone's
But
gonna
I was
get
like,
hurt. What a great
that's
idea!
what I wanted to do. I was like, I really wanted to do flair bartending and have everything.
They're
be-
throwing bottles
yeah.
and spinning things. It's like, yeah. Oh man, well that's good stuff. So now here we are down the road. You said 20 years.
Mhm.
20
Yeah.
years in the industry of learning and trial and error, and that recipe or that flavor didn't take. No one ordered that, or this was really popular. Seasonal ideas. You've really refined your product down to something that is unique,
Mhm.
and it's a great selling point. How do you communicate clearly to someone in just a few short statements what it is that your product? What is it? Because I'm just sitting here listening to it. We've been talking for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I'm just like, whoa, there's a lot going on here. How can you clearly communicate this to your clients or maybe potential franchisees?
I think a lot of times we'll just start and say we make what you like, or we don't make it until you order it. So you can make any combinations of flavors, and we put those all together and we freeze it for you. A lot of times you'll get people that still just don't get it, or it's like the deer in the headlights as they look at that menu and just have too many choices. And so
there's 3 quadrillion choices. 3 quadrillion.
So we'll have like a
I believe that you did the math on that. That's not a made up number.
No, it's not.
This was a fun story though. We had our Ashland, Massachusetts store. They opened a year ago, and we were there for their grand opening. So we're sitting there. We were there, helping to train and stuff, but also just kind of sitting in the background. And so I'm sitting in the lobby area and watch this family, 2 young kids and the mom and dad, and they just barely have their ice cream. And then little by little, I see the kid going over to the menu and counting flavors, and then came back over to the table, and then they go back over and she counts the number of mix-ins. She goes back over and gets the number, and they'd gotten. So the Ashland store had a great idea. So they made a bulletin board where people can post it, or not post it, but post
postcards,
index cards.
Yeah, index cards.
So index cards and pens. So they're like, write your favorite flavor, write one of your best combinations, and put it up there. So they had taken one of those index cards and they had done the math. Number of flavors times number of mix-ins times number of bases, because we can do original, low-fat, vegan, all of his
keto
different ones. And so they had done all of that math. This times this times this time this. This is the amount of choices and options that there are at Sub-Zero. And then they put that up on the flavor roll. I loved that. That was so cool. And it was the parents with their 10 to 12, 8, 10-year-olds. Kids
mathing it
doing
out.
it. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was so much fun.
It was just the inquisitive mind, just thinking about what's possible.
But a lot of times it's very daunting because it is just so much. And
so we have 12 options to choose from that we've already determined. So to make it easy. And a lot of times
sometimes we'll say you can use those as a starting point even, you can, if you wanted to change out some of the mix-ins, you can, but these are ones that are really great. Like we know that they're really good combinations.
I have a sister-in-law that would fry her noodle. She could not do it. I would have to drop her off before dinner. I'd go get dinner and come back and then wait.
Yeah.
It would fry.
Sometimes the line, we worry about it taking too long. We worry a little bit about time and making sure that we are getting through and making the order as quick as we can so people aren't having to wait too long. And we actually are able to do it pretty quick, but sometimes the hardest, the part that takes the longest is just people making the decision.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just have to say, all right, step aside, we'll take you. And we just, I kind of look at the counter as a zone defense. You have.
Yeah.
You
pray about this. You pray about it. You're ready. Let's go. That is awesome.
So you kind of have to
watch the crowd.
Yeah. Well, it's.
Well, and a lot of times customers are great. Also, they're like, "You go ahead. I'm not ready yet." But.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, so here's the thing: is when we first sat down, I'm an ice cream eater. If you can't tell by looking at me, and I like to go and I like to do the mix-ins. And so when you were talking about the mix-ins, I'm thinking, like a Heath bar, you mix that into the coffee base or whatever it is. That's not at all what you're talking about. You're talking about straight creating the.
But the difference is,
I'm mixing it into a solid. You're mixing it as a liquid.
Yeah, but you can also do it in the liquid. So if you put it in the liquid and then freeze it, or you can put it on after, or you can put it on top. So you can do it. So I say, well, when people ask, would you want, caramel? I would say, do you want it dissolved in, or do you want it as a ribbon? Because they're different.
So
or
after
do you want
it's
it on
been
top?
frozen,
Yeah.
Or we'll do that with.
It's so caramel, just
back to
caramel.
4 quadrillion here.
Wow, what an amazing idea! That's so much fun. I'm glad we're talking about this because it's
and berries. Berries when they're mixed in a machine, they just become mush.
Yeah,
right. A cherry is just, it's. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it has no texture.
The flavor's there, but there's not a texture of cherry. Yeah.
And so it just becomes But with our process, even when we freeze it in it, the berries they keep their own texture, and they so when you bite into the berry, it bursts. They and that's different. I mean, that's really different.
Wait, I'm sorry. This is just totally a selfish question here. Could you take the berries, true fruit?
Mm,
Can you do that to the berries before you mix it in the ice cream with the nitrogen?
yeah, we already have some frozen in the back, so you could do that just with frozen berries. So we use. There's a difference
Are you
between
talking like freeze dried berries or like the frozen?
Frozen.
Okay.
The ones you have to buy in the freezer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could make that
Yeah,
with fresh.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
You need to calm down.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm
But,
going to go back to the board here.
But what I've also, one thing I want to try doing, and we started on it, is making custom chocolate bars. So we have tempered chocolate, and then if you freeze it in nitrogen, so you can make a customized chocolate bar. So in 10 seconds.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's
That's
So listen, what do you charge to just rent the space for a couple hours on a casual Sunday afternoon?
To a motorcycle club.
I've thought about that for classes or something. I'm trying to figure out like what kind of, because I think it'd be so much fun to do, like, either courses or classes or something, or where you could just. We actually do that flavor testing though for wedding parties, so we call it tasting. So you just come in and we just make it different flavors, and you can try different flavors, whatever you
as
want.
they're planning out what flavors they'll have for their event.
Well, see, I think you're just missing one more layer to the business model here. Right next door, we'll put a clothes exchange in for the big fella when he needs to come out as a large and come in as an extra large. Rent it out for a couple hours.
Now,
Double your profits.
I need to clarify something. My brother's a physiologist. And he's a specifically a muscle research physiologist, a PhD. And and we were asking him, like, I was talking to him about, well, for one thing, we had a sugar-free mix that we're buying. And I said, hey, would you mind like looking at this mix and tell me if it's a good diabetic option? He says, it's a terrible diabetic option. It's like, there's even though it's sugar-free, there's so many carbs in it, in other forms.
So just because
And-
something says it's sugar free doesn't mean it's
And,
so that's we're not
So
using
he
that
says,
anymore.
you're going to kill somebody with this diabetic, this sugar-free option. So anyway, I was like, oh, bro, okay. So now we have like a keto version that's, heavy whipping cream and almond milk and then stevia. And that's a true,
Good one.
zero carb option. But then, then he said, your ice cream has actually got quite a bit of protein. And I thought, I mean, I don't relative, what's a lot of protein? And he's like, a 3 ounce or 4 ounce serving has got 10 grams of protein.
What?
Now, if you think about it, like
So
a
dense.
smoothie that you buy at Tropical Fruit Smoothie, their high protein is 15 grams.
Yeah.
And so you get more protein, probably less sugar than a high protein shake with just an ice cream.
And we're back.
So it's actually pretty healthy, when you
weigh it
think
out.
about it.
So where's your location that you're at now? The first location is where?
So our first location was in Orem, Utah.
Okay.
We moved from there to a location in Provo. So we're on Provo Center Street, across from the City Center Temple. We're also in Lehi, at the Traverse Mountain by the Harmons.
Okay.
And so we also have one in Sandy. There's a Sudzura there, and one in Cedar City as far as Utah locations.
Okay.
But
In Sandy, where's it at in Sandy?
7th East and 98 South.
Oh, I know right
So
where that
it's
is.
right by the Philadelphian.
Oh yeah,
That's kind of the landmark, everybody.
I know right where that is. Yeah, the Philadelphian. This is a sandwich shop that's been there since Brigham Young pulled into the valley.
Yeah, it's pretty old.
They've got like the grease on the walls.
Yeah,
You know,
it's-
that
My
is
dad
actually
knew
a
it in high school.
talent
Yeah.
for Rob. He actually knows where all of the places where grease on the walls
yeah.
actually exists, and it's very helpful. We can get to most of them on a motorcycle.
It's a gift.
Yeah, it's a good sandwich, but
It's a dirty shop.
it's a dirty shop. It's
Yeah,
filthy.
I got hepatitis A through J in that place more than once. Happily, by the way.
Phenomenal sandwich.
Yeah, great
Yeah,
sandwich.
phenomenal sandwich.
But you
I-
got to take it and go. You don't want to eat it.
Well, the smells will kind of.
Yeah.
Well,
They haven't changed the grease on the French fries since I was in high school.
adds that extra crisp, if you will.
You would think it's
A
they
smoky
get
flavor.
made fun of all the time.
Yeah.
You'd think they'd figure that out.
But no,
Go
they're cranking
feed
it out. They're cranking it out. Oh man, I'm glad I'm not the only one that knows about the Philadelphian over there. Well, so what, now that you've been doing it for 20 years, like if you could go back and say to yourself, like at the very beginning, what advice would you give those optimistic ice cream entrepreneurs? And what would you say to yourself?
I always, so we, I think I always say with that to have confidence in yourself.
Yeah.
Don't expect that you can't, that you have to have somebody else to help you. And that's hard because it's really hard to do it yourselves. I kind of say that because somewhat early on we took on partners, and we did that because we felt we didn't have enough confidence in ourselves. That's a hard thing because partners are important too, but the right partners are important. and it's a pretty rough lesson we learned in having to separate from them.
Oh, it's worse than divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was.
It's terrible.
There's times I ran into my old partner last Friday at a conference. Worse than that, I had to listen to him speak in front of the whole crowd, and I'm going, if you only knew the backstory behind anything he's actually saying, it's but it was I just came by there just with anxiety, and I didn't understand that from my dad had a partner, and I don't think it was this bad, but it was pretty bad. When he was an architect, and I think my dad was always the sales guy, and so he was also doing the architecture, but the other guy was not a people person, so he would not be out, and he would be like, well, I'm doing all the work. Well, somebody's got to be
Catching the fish.
Yeah. And so it's all about, giving credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
And I think that this is one thing I think I would say is that it's really easy to get. My old partner had a saying, and I think you probably heard this saying before: everybody's replaceable. Well, in a narcissistic world, everybody's replaceable but yourself. So it's now, having said that, I'm going to take one step further. It's I don't think anybody's replaceable. You should have an attitude of nobody's replaceable, and that you should give everybody credit. And so that, and I when we started the business, I specifically didn't put my name on the paperwork as shareholder 100%. I specifically gave her, it was very deliberate, and to make sure that she had shares, I had shares, and that there was always credit, and that anyway, and that's, so I think that's important.
So organization is important. Confidence in yourself is important.
I think also thinking about this, at least for me, I feel like sometimes I never fully have embraced being an entrepreneur. I have always felt like I'm the supportive wife, but it wasn't my dream necessarily to own a business, but I knew that it was my husband's, which was helpful because if I hadn't, I knew that's who, I mean, our first date, he talked about owning a business. Like I had to know that that's what I was getting into.
remember
and
that.
so,
But
Allegedly.
If she said it, it's probably true.
no, it probably was.
so there are times when I've, if I've been frustrated about being a business owner, because it comes with a lot of frustrations, anything does. And, I've had to remind myself that I knew this was what I was getting into. But there are other times as well that I don't think I fully embraced being an entrepreneur, or which kind of goes along with confidence as well, or wanting to really accept that role and realize what it takes. Because otherwise I'm not just regretting it, but
Resenting it?
resenting it. Yeah.
Now, when she was younger,
So-
she was very, very shy. And she was, wouldn't you say, would
Yeah.
you call it?
Yeah.
So, and she ran cross country, but about 2000, I ran for state senate, and so she's joining with me, and we are our
Doing the
One-year-old
things.
son, and we're
walking
knocking
along
on doors, and we
doing
run
flyers.
across her cross country coach, and her cross country coach looked at her like, "Is that you, Naomi, knocking on
what
doors?
are you doing? You're
Like you're
his main line
out
to me
campaigning?"
all through high school was like, Naomi, stop talking, because I wasn't talking. And so yeah, it's certainly, and I will say this, like Jerry has certainly pushed me to do things that I never wanted to do and never thought I could, but I had to. And so it did force me into doing a lot of things that I never
She's
did.
here.
But
Look at that.
Right.
Telling the story.
So,
But I think that there's another thing too, is that people say, I can never do a business with my spouse. And I say, I don't think I could do it without her. And it's, and I think that I see, when I was in the military, I was in a top secret area. It's not that we did anything was that secret. I just handled classified information. So it was, but typically in a classified military situation, you can't go home and talk about it. And it's, so it's the same thing with any kind of business. Typically you go to work, you're working about your thing, your wife does her thing, you come together, and then you have a few hours together, and you really don't, you grow apart. Why do you grow apart? Because you don't have anything in common. And so as long as you have the common goals, and if you're always working in the same direction, then it's the best of both worlds.
It's a tricky thing working with your wife. My business partner is my wife, and she has her lane, her area of genius, which there's no doubt about. And I have mine, and it took a while to discover that. And so what she's good at and what I'm good at, but I don't think it's for everybody. And I think sometimes more her than me, but I'm pretty sure she wants to stab me once in a while.
There's a lot of reasons for that one.
Yeah. Not the only one.
Not just working together.
Well, I'm not saying that it's the only way to stay together, but I'm just saying that I see a lot of divorces in the military, and I think that's because you can't talk about it. You come home and you go on a deployment, you go this or that, and you grow. It's really easy to grow apart.
Yeah.
Now you work together, at least in some capacity together, whether it's the different lanes or not, but you still have a common goal.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I appreciate your time sharing your journey with the product and how exciting it is. I'm excited to go try it out. I kind of want to head over there now.
We want to do some experimenting.
I want to do that apple pie Tabasco. That sounds amazing. The thing that I really want to point out to the young listeners that we have is that it's a trial and error thing. It's a thing. It's owning a business is living a life, and it's about growing up yourself in the business and becoming confident in who am I and what is my role. And in that discovery, you guys have told a great story, and so thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
Thanks
for letting us tell it.
Yeah,
it's fun. It was a really, really, really good time to chat. And anyway, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't forget, like, share, and subscribe. We'll catch you on the next one.
All right.